Hey everybody, Coach Lee here. Thanks for joining us for a red hot spectacular. We have Matthew Lefthand, now a legendary athlete in America who just nailed a American record for the solo non-drafting 24-hour this past weekend in Sebring, Florida, at 576 crazy miles. So we thank him for joining us today. And we just want to break everything down and kind of talk about training, the race itself, tech that he's got going. He is a data geek. So
Mhm.
we're going to get all geeky for those of you who are excited about that and break out some watts and things like that. And he wants to talk about, the future, like what his immediate plans are for this year and then in the future. But what we have here today, everybody, I'm going to tell you, I look at thousands of files. I work with athletes on the national world level. I work with lots of different athletes. And the gentleman that we have here has a massive aerobic engine. This is it's part genetics, it's discipline, it's consistency, it's progression, it's knowledge, it's education. But he has, all the stars are in alignment right now for Matthew in his particular career. He is a massive talent, and it's really special to have him on. So, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. And tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump in and talk about training, the race, and everything else.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Like to say diesel running smooth, right? So just got to power up the motor and get going. So, yeah, my name is Matthew Lefthand. I've been cycling now for 2.5 years, which is part of the story that we can get into. I'm not too long into this sport. I have some great support behind me. Yeah,
It's just amazing.
one of
I
my
look
main.
at a lot of data, dude. That's just it's
Yeah,
outstanding, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, you're nothing without your support system. A big part of this race that we'll be telling a little bit of story of was the voices inside my head, my mom cheering for me, like things. I say you have to have this library of things to get through an event like this because every time you go over 12 hours, stuff gets bad no matter what, no matter no matter how hard you're working, it gets ugly. And so this time was the first time that I remembered clearly my mom cheering for me in my head. She used to come to my swim meets and was the only voice you could hear in the pool under the water. So I was on the bike thinking about this time. I have a great wife who was my main support there. I have some amazing sponsors. I professionally am a mental health counselor, and my team is actually not a racing team. It's a mental health based team called Brainstoke. And their whole thing is get your 5 S's: get your sleep, get your sun, get your sweat, get your love, or a sex, and get your stoke, which is where the stoke comes from. So like get fulfilled, live a good life and be happy and well. So they're my main team, but then I've got some other great sponsors. Formula 369 is my main nutrition sponsor, which is a huge part of this effort that we can break down. Cycling Upgrades here in Utah is an online bike shop you can get parts from. And then I'm starting to work with a few others, but they're kind of like pending and everything. So I'll keep them coming as we get everything worked out for the upcoming events.
Yeah, that's great. I love the 5 S's. I'm going to use that. Believe me, that's a good
Yeah.
one.
Get your
So
five
yeah,
S's in. Yeah.
yeah. So first, again, I want to say thank you for joining us today. And you're super open about all this stuff. And we're going to look at your data. We're going to break down the ride. And what I always say, as a coach, that there's just no secrets in this game anymore.
Yeah.
There's no secret workouts. There's no secret plans. We could put everything that you do, right? Every exact thing that you do.
Mhm.
And guess what? Probably no one's going to do it. Or if they do it, that might not be the right
Yeah.
plan for them, right?
Right.
All this is very individualized. So I'm nothing special, but I put everything out there that I do. I don't hide my power numbers on Strava or anything like that. And because I just know I work with too many athletes, and I just know that, I mean, we make your list of 100 things that you do every single day. No one's going to do it, right? They're going to
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
one day, maybe 2 days, and again, it
And
might
if
not be for them. So
and if you do inspire someone, you may get them to do that plus more, and you might learn from them. So it's all adding to the collective betterment of the sport and people.
Yeah, I like that. And I find that with the ultra community, but both in the
Mhm.
running and in the cycling, like David Roach in the running ultra world, like he's just telling everybody everything that he's doing,
Mhm.
everything. And so I love it. And so yeah, let's jump in. Let's just talk about your
Let's do
training. And
it.
so, I've listened to you before in the past. You've mentioned you definitely use a power meter.
Mhm.
So and you have a massive aerobic engine. Like you
Mhm.
are amazing. So this takes work. I've heard you mention Joe Friel in the past. So
Mhm.
talk about kind of your big picture theory of developing that aerobic engine. Mention Joe Friel or not, like just so break that down a little bit for us.
Yeah. I had a health journey a few years ago where I had, over the course of life in grad school, got up to 270, 280 pounds. I actually don't even know how much I weighed because you don't want to know how much you weigh when you're that heavy. And somehow we created a diet where my wife and I were able to both lose a significant amount of weight, about 100 pounds for me and 40 pounds for her. And I had always loved running. So I was like, let's get back into running. And so I ran my first marathon in 2021 and I did okay. I survived. I don't even remember what the time was now, 3:29 or something like that. And I afterwards though was just like, I want to get better at this. Like I'm healthy, I'm fit, let's get back into it. A lot more story there, but how I got into my specific training was I started to just devour stuff about training. How do people get faster? I ran into a TEDx talk that talked about run slower to get faster. And I had my introduction into zone 2 training and I became a student. And I've just been like in the dojo of zone 2 training ever since. And I had this thing that about 4 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago now, I said, I'm going to commit to 5 years of just putting in the aerobic work. I don't have 10 years of that like a lot of other athletes at my age do because I haven't been doing it. So I'm going to put 5 years in of aerobic work and just build and build and build that engine. And then eventually I was like, well, when the gains stop happening, I'll stop doing it. They just never have. And maybe they will, and I'll do more upper work. And I have done some here and there, but it just keeps going. I just keep adding onto that zone 2 and onto the aerobic. And so that's, I mean, that's the story of it. It's just building, building, building.
And so how do you get like so how do you know your zones? Like so how do you know your zone 2, your zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, all that
Yeah.
stuff?
Power tests.
So you're
Um,
doing like the 20-minute FTP test or some variant of that?
did my first ramp test a few months into cycling on Zwift, and I didn't know how to use Zwift at all. But I heard about power tests, and they said
Right.
do a ramp test because that's easier than a 20-minute, especially when you don't know what your power is yet.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
did the ramp test. I got my number. I started working with that. I got to the point where I started to get pretty familiar with that line, that feeling of when you are in zone 2 versus when you're starting to burn more lactic acid. It's especially easier to tell when you do longer rides. When you do 2 or 3 hour rides, you can tell if you still have energy at the end of it that you're in zone. But if you're starting to get fatigued by the end of it, you can see that you're maybe starting to flirt with the lines a little bit. And so I
Okay.
just started
So
to get a feel of like where does zone 2 end and zone 3 start, and then I can probably guess my FTP. And then the next time I want to go for a test, I know what I'm going to shoot for, and I shoot for that number. And if I get it, great. If I think I have more in the tank, then I know where I'm at. But I just kind of always keeping track of it. And then I haven't done a 20-minute test now in probably a year. I just kind of know from the zone 2 exactly where it's at. And when I do threshold efforts and when I do VO2 efforts, they feel right. And so I'm just kind of constantly checking it. And then just like I said, bumping it up 5 watts here, 5 watts there, or adding an hour to the week here, adding an hour to the week there, so on and so forth.
yeah, so I mean that's a great explanation. And there's always like so how I describe it. So and like someone wants to buy a house, right? And you have five people who want to buy that house. They all might have five different ways that they're actually going to buy that house. All right.
Yeah.
So if you're a multimillionaire, your strategy for buying that house is going to be different than if you have to go to the bank for a loan and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different ways to get to that same
Mm-hmm.
direction. And so this is
Mm-hmm.
what I think is really fascinating about you. So how I do it, and when I work with my athletes, right, we do so for probably through the winter, when we're really working on their aerobic foundation, when we're
Yeah.
really trying
Yeah.
to push up their FTP from below, which sounds
Mm-hmm.
like you've done amazingly. You've just really pushed that FTP up from below. That we'll definitely do the FTP test to make sure that their zones are set in. But like
Yeah.
what you were saying about RPE, rate of perceived exertion,
Yeah. Yeah.
where like you can tell like from your breathing, so I
Mm-hmm.
have them do like talk tests to so that they don't need watts, they don't need a screen to know what zone that they're in, right?
Totally.
Like, so if they can talk and regularly, that they're in this zone. If they can breathe just in and out of their nose, they're in this zone. If they can't, right, then they're in this zone. So it's all about understanding those zones according to your feeling. But I definitely have them test, all the time. And then like when I get a new person, what I do is, we get their FTP. And then that's a great, so when, a lot of people don't understand that when you're doing these events, you're cruising, if you're going in for a 24-hour ultra event, like what makes you so special is not that you can do zone 4 for 24 hours, is that your zone 1 and zone 2 are so high.
Mm-hmm.
Today Pogacar is a great example. If he does zone 2 ride,
Totally.
he's out there for 300 watts. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's his zone 2. That's his easy. He's talking. He's having a good time,
Mm-hmm.
just chucking it up at 300 watts. Whereas me at 300 watts, I did an FTP test today. I'm dying. I got, I did my FTP test. It was 296. And
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
no talking in that effort, right? But
Yeah.
your zone 2 is so massively up
Yeah.
that you're able just to cruise at amazing speeds. And
Yeah.
so what I do is like, I do the test, we set their zones, and then I give them a strategy, like let's start your race at upper zone 1, and then cruise. If you're feeling great, move yourself into zone 2 and stuff like that. But you've really, I love that, because you've really, obviously you're very successful. Success speaks for
Mm-hmm.
itself. So that's great. And so I like another thing that you said in there is, and I've heard you say before in other podcasts, like the consistency is important, but I really love what you said about progression. And you even mentioned it today, like you add a little extra every week, and that you're just layering up your,
10% every week.
yeah.
Yep. If
Tell
you
me more
can,
about that, because you've talked about it before. Pretty cool.
yeah. Yeah, and in a bunch of different, whether it's Joe Friel. So some of my people that I've gone to, Joe Friel, of course, is a huge one that everyone knows about. Before I even touched cycling specific stuff, it was Rich Roll, it was David Goggins, it was some of these giants of endurance sports that kind of just taught you to, one, go further than you think that you could, but also do it in such a way that it's sustainable, doable, repeatable, measurable. And so I started to run into these things that were like, if you want to progress long term, the way that, once again, the 5-year commitment, I committed to 5 years. If I could get 10% better every week or every month for 5 years, like the chart would just be incredible where you get to. Look, I'm 3 or 4 years in, right? like the chart is just crazy about how fast you can step up. So every week, it's like if you can add at the most that much and sustain that for however many weeks you can until you either need to plateau or take a break or something and then do it again. That's been a huge commitment of mine, is just add that much. And I found that, yeah, if you try to add more than that, the fatigue hits you and you've got to recover. And if you spend a half a week or a week or 2 weeks recovering, that's lost progression time. And you're going to lose more time there that you could be gaining slowly. So it's this slow grind uphill. Like I said, you add 5 watts, and 5 watts doesn't seem significant. You add that in 1 week. But if you add 5 watts for 10 weeks, you're 50 watts up, right? And so it's just chiseling away, just building, building, building.
Yeah, that's really good. So, and obviously everything says, you've done it. And so, and then do you think in terms of, so I know that you go for watts.
Yeah.
Now, do you think in terms of miles at all, or are you just thinking in terms of watts and time?
Yeah. So I train mostly inside. In in 2023, I think I had 12,000 outdoor miles and about 18,000 indoor miles. So I was still more than half indoors. Yeah, 31,000 or something. Last year, I only had 6,000 outdoor miles, which, if you count up all my racing, was quite a bit of it as well. So I didn't spend a ton of time outside, but I still had the like 24,000 indoor miles. So when you're indoors, it's so different because you could be in a group going faster, or it's not always accurate. So I kind of throw miles out the door a little bit and just focus on time. I mean, and you mentioned this. I've heard you say this, and I think we're going to talk more about it today. Training stress is what we're really talking about. The more training stress you can take, the better you get. So if you're measuring miles, like, a mile can be the hardest effort of your whole entire life, or it can be like going around the block with your kid. It's completely different, right? And so, but time in watts equals training stress. And so if you can measure those two things and let go of how far you went or that kind of thing, then that's what matters. In fact, I didn't even think about for a long time how far I could go in 24 hours. And then once I did, it was based off of the power and the position and everything that I did to set a goal on that. And so then I set this goal, like when I was getting ready for this race, I said, how far could I go? And so I just based it off of everything that I said. And I said, you know what? I think I could go about 600 miles. That'd be kind of cool, 25 miles per hour. And then I looked up, like, what do people do in 24-hour races? And I'm like, oh, no one does that. Like,
No, I know.
maybe that's a crazy goal. Maybe that's too much. But then I thought, well, it doesn't matter. Like, I know me, I know where I'm at. Like, if that's the goal, that's the goal. And really, the day of factors are so varied that, like, I'm just going to have to play it when I get there. But what I know I can do is around that. So I'm just going to set myself on that course and follow the numbers and everything. It gets a little bit trickier once you start doing weather and wind and all that kind of stuff, which we can talk about my effort and how it kind of flowed and everything. But yeah.
Yeah. And so that when you're talking about stress, and so are you using a training platform like Training Peaks or something like that? How
Nope.
are you recording your weekly stress like TSS or any things like that? You're not.
So I do
Yeah.
look at TSS every now and then.
Right.
Nothing religious. Like, I probably haven't looked at it in 3 weeks now. Um, I mostly look at it to see, out of interest, what it is, and then when I go and look and see, like, what are normal training stress scores. Some of my weeks in the winter are crazy. I mean, they're like 1900 or something like that, and I'm like just soaring up there. So I don't really get technical that much with that number. I more focus on the powers, the average powers that I'm doing for the times I'm doing, and then thinking about how I want to progress that. Can I add more wattage? Can I add more time? Can I adapt to the training more so I can do more in some way next week? Or can I, and then just keep kind of pushing it up until I need to take a little bit of time, or I'm peaking for an event or something. So it's not technically TSS as we all talk about it, but it's definitely stress. It's just adding more stress every week and adapting to it.
Are you recording that in a spreadsheet, or how do you track what you're, like the progression?
Yeah. So Strava will break down your like weekly hours and everything. So I'll pay attention on there to the hours, and I'll watch that kind of chart. Once again, not the mileage chart, because the mileage chart can look way different depending what you did that week, if you did a bunch of climbing or whatever. So I put it on time, and then I'm keeping track of, what are the averages of my rides. I don't actually look at a weekly power average number, but I know that I did this many easy rides and this many upper zone 2 rides and this many kind of effort rides. And so, I keep that kind of constant. And then over the winter, I mostly build time. And then once I get to the max time that I want to do, I'm in that 31 hour range. Then I just like edge up the power for a couple weeks. I do a couple weeks of 30 hours and just try and do a little more power every single week. And it just keeps bumping up. So it's worked.
Well, I mean, you're like, I can't stress this enough. Like, I just look at so many athletes, but you are like really genetically talented with that big, this massive aerobic engine that you have. And I love you coming into this sport because, when I look at a lot of the records and things like that, and I'm just looking at them, I'm like, man, it's like Unbound Gravel when the professionals started racing it, and they have these massive engines and the times just dropped, dramatically. And, that's what's going to happen in a lot of the events that you're at and the events that you're doing is like, if people with just these massive engines start showing up, the times are going to start coming down. And, before we jump into your data, so you did Sebring, you got a new American, non-drafting solo 24-hour record, 576 miles. Well, who had the record before you, and what was that record?
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, which I'm still open to people correcting it, I don't want to speak out of term ever when it comes to this. But as far as I'm aware, this is the furthest an American has gone ever in 24 hours. Race, non-race, like record effort. This is the furthest by American by far. Amanda Cocker did 515, and I think I've seen a couple males go around that or 520 beforehand. But there's not a ton of Americans doing really crazy far 24-hour races. Most of them are Europeans. And there are several Europeans who, in record-specific attempts or in mostly record, and they're on a track or they're on a velodrome or something, they've gone about 570, 580. The outright 24-hour record is by the Chris Strasser. Chris Strasser is the man when it comes to ultra racing. He has the Ram records. He has the Ram wins. Yep. I mean, he's a legend of the sport. And so he went like 636 miles, I think, or six.
Yep, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. And 26.7 miles per hour for 24 hours. And so he's got the outright record by far. But as far as a non-drafting race event, he went 567 miles in Borrego Springs, I believe in 2018 or 19. And that's the longest non-drafting race event I can find. So I think it's the longest non-drafting race outright, and it's the longest an American has gone by quite a ways as well. Which shout out to Amanda Cocker. She's done some amazing things as well. Yeah. 515 is no joke.
Do you know where she lives? I think she lives just down the street from me, to be honest. Yeah. I live like right outside of Roanoke, and I know she rides with this team called Team 24. But I don't know if she's actually moved to the area. I know that she rides with that team. Not sure if she moved to the area or not. I see her name in the paper every once in a while. Yeah. So that's really incredible. And so what's awesome, what I love about this is that I think you're going to get that 636. Like, you could potentially do it next year. Like, if you go back to that same location and great favorable weather, all the stars are in alignment, you definitely can get over the 600. I think, like, if when I'm looking at your data, I'm thinking that you could have gotten over 600 miles on this attempt.
If I had paced it for purely 600, I totally agree. If also it wasn't so hot that day, I was
there's environment.
So giving you just a little bit of the story, I was sick 12 days, and my first day feeling back to complete normal was the day before the race. And luckily it wasn't like during the build of all of this or anything, like it was during taper, but my legs were definitely not as fresh as I wanted them to be going in. And I wasn't sure what the efforts were like there in Florida, because I went riding out in the heat and my heart rate was jacked up. And I didn't know if it was because I was sick. I didn't know if it was because I was hot. And so I was like, I just kind of got to trust the power number. If I'm feeling healthy, no matter what my heart does, like, let's just try and go with it. And it's hard to gauge by effort 24 hours, because you can feel great at the pace you're doing in 2 or 3 hours and think you can do it for 24 hours, but it always hits a wall and you never know. And even if you pace it right, like I did an indoor one in December, and then you take out all the environmental factors, right? And I did 266 for 24 hours. I wanted to like roll up in a ball on the floor for like hours of that, like just like totally done, and like body is cooked and everything. So even if you pace it right, it's not going to feel great. So it was hard to know if I was on pace and just like working hard, or if I was a little bit over. And as the race went on, it became apparent around the halfway mark that I had overbaked it. And I already know that I struggle with the night, and I'm trying to figure that out anyway. And I was like, it's going to be a long, hard night. Like, this is not going to be pretty. And I immediately started bargaining with myself, like, just get to this point, just get to that point, like, just get so second place can't get past you, just break the course record. And I was like, no, you are here to pull everything out of yourself. So you're going to go as long and as far as you can, even if you like fall over at the end. But it was hard because it wasn't paced perfectly because of all the factors.
We'll jump into your data. But before
Yeah.
we do that, tell me one more thing about, well, actually, I would love to talk about two more things.
Yeah.
One, you're 24/7. Like, what does your day look like? And then
Yeah.
two, experimentation. It's
Yeah.
experimentation is crucial to any sport. With the ultra events, the experimentation is a little bit harder because
Yeah.
you can only do so many of these events a year. You can only
Right.
do so much, experimental training.
Right.
So talk about your 24/7 and then experiments that you run and how you run experiments.
Perfect. So my 24/7, I train absurdly early. And a lot of that's because I built up my volume so high that to not interflict with or conflict with work or family things. I just have gotten to the point where I get up super early and train early. I have young kids, so they go to bed early and I go to bed shortly after them. And then I'm up at 3:30 on the trainer at 4 pretty much every day nowadays.
I love it.
I
I
when I
love it.
had when I had our second kid born, and you're at that stage where like no one's sleeping good, I had some really weird schedules where I would like get up and try and help with the baby, ride for 3 or 4 hours, go back to sleep, and then wake up. So I had and some of that was outdoors. Like I was literally at like midnight or like 1 a.m. riding through the streets of like a rural Utah, or I was on the trainer. So I had some really weird schedules then, but pretty much now I'm asleep, getting about 6 to 7 hours of sleep, and then getting up early, training. I go to work, and I've structured life now where I've reduced my workload to the point where I have time for all of this and still time to do family things. So my wife and I, we both work 3 days a week. The other 2 days of the week, we have to do a little bit of work stuff, but that's where I get more of my training load in. I do a lot of doubles. So I'll double up on those days. I'll do big weekends,
Two
and then
rides in. When you say double, you're doing
doubles.
like a
Yeah.
ride in the morning and a
Ride
ride in
in the
the afternoon.
morning, ride in the afternoon. When my volume's big, like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday are almost all doubles. And a lot of that's because like I value my family time. I am at breakfast with my family, except for in the winter when I do these long 100-mile Saturday rides. And then even then it's 8 o'clock, but I'm at breakfast with my family pretty much every day at 7 a.m. And I value that, and it's a consistency, and it's what keeps my wife supporting me, and I support her in her events. So I'm there at breakfast, and then if I want more training load, I've got to do it in the middle of the day, and I have young kids, so it's nap time or they're busy or whatever, and so we do our thing. My wife goes for a run or whatever. So that's what the my 24/7 looks like. And as I'm getting more into the like chasing, putting this on the road, breaking more ultra records, going for more things, I'm thinking of ways to continue to reduce my work. So I'm a mental health counselor, but I also supervise some other therapists who are in training to be therapists. And so I'm probably going to bring on some more therapists and do more supervising, less of my own casework, so that I do more. So I do less work and I do more training stuff, and also just bike stuff. Like I've been basically doing a part-time job trying to work with like sponsorships and get some of these events set up and everything. It's a ton of work and it's paying off, which is really
Yeah,
cool.
good. You
But
should be sponsored. Yeah.
that's taking me 10, 15 hours. I'm actually finalizing this week a bike sponsor and wheel sponsor, and getting some really cool people on board that are going to support me really well for the next couple of years if things keep going good. So it's paying off, but it's taking more time. And until now, I've kept everything kind of confined to just like training time. And so it's been a lot of conversations with my wife of like, how do we balance this and how do we move forward with it? And are we both on board? Is this what we want to do?
Yeah.
So
And then tell me about experimentation. I've
yeah,
heard you talk about this. I love it. It's a concept that I stress is that, like I said, like not every athlete's going to get to the same point, in the same way.
yeah,
Athletes don't like it when I say there is no answer here. We have 5 options. Athletes don't often like, me to say that. And I'm saying we have to experiment. And, it's up to me as a coach to know the experiments to run. right?
Mhm.
And so I'm always looking for new experiments, for new ideas, for things like that. So what are your favorite experiments, and what have proven the most fruitful?
Yeah, I'll give you the example of nutrition and fueling because that's probably, I think,
Yeah.
what makes this happen. Besides the genetic and the commitment and the training and all the other stuff you have to do, the nutrition is really what makes or breaks this type of effort. And so when I first started learning about nutrition and learning like how much sugar you're supposed to do and how much you're supposed to eat and how you get that, and like seeing what other cyclists do in terms of what food they bring or the sugar drinks they do, I was really natural at first, like doing a whole bunch of dried fruit or granola, doing some sugar drinks, but not much. I started making my own for a long time, which was apple juice and salt and water, essentially with extra sugar. Apple
Mhm.
juice, whole bunch of sugar, salt and water. It was a really cheap, really efficient way to do it. My body handles fruit super well. And so I did that for a long time. And then I started thinking, if I'm going to keep doing this, because when you're burning 800 or 700 calories an hour, you can eat 5 or 600 calories and do super long zone 2 days. When you start doing 250, 260, 270 watts, and you're burning now 800, 900, 950 calories, and you're going to do that for 12 plus hours, like there's just no way that you're going to go into a 2, 3, 400 calorie. It's not metabolically possible for you to break down enough fat and take care of that and keep going. And so I was like, you have to eat more. And I was like, so how do you do that? And that's when I really started coming to people like Chris Strasser and some of these other guys who have just mastered eating on the bike. And so I started pushing. That's the biggest experimentation, is how much can I eat and what can I eat that tastes good? Rice doesn't work for my body on these long rides. Learn that the hard way. But I tried other things and keep trying, and eventually got to the point where I could eat 6, 7, up to 800 calories an hour on the bike pretty reliably, and I knew the foods that I could do it with. Then the experiment was, okay, well, we've all been on the bike before and like choked on the gummy bear or
Yeah.
like dropped the granola bar and been like, now what? Like I'm either going to die or crash or go back. Like, how many calories was that? And so when I'm thinking of doing, 24, 25 miles per hour for 24 hours, fumbling around with wrappers and carrying extra stuff and not littering and all that kind of stuff is a reduce the stress. That's the last thing that I want to worry about and have to like fumble around with. So I was like, how do people do this? And I found out that Strasser has done these huge efforts, liquid only. And I started, and so, but then everyone was like, you can't do that. You can't do liquid over 12 hours. That's stupid. You can't, but he did it. Like, so why not? And so I took a training, I started doing it on my long rides. And then I took a specific day in January to test it once I figured out the right concoction of liquid formula for myself, and did 12 hours on liquid only. And I did most liquid in December as well. And so that was the basic experiment, is how many calories can I take? What's the composite of that between carbs, fats, and protein? And how much salt do I need? I've experimented a ton with that. And then can I do it all in liquid? And just like everything else, introduce it a little bit at a time. Eat 400 calories in liquid, and then eat 600 calories in liquid, or 5 and then 6, and then just kind of push it up and up and up while I'm doing the rest of the training. So that's the biggest one that I've just experimented with over and over again. And I came in contact with Formula 369, and they have amazing products that just work perfect. Strasser uses Ensure, and I got Formula 369's recovery mix, and it's basically the same caloric makeup. It's very clean food. There's no extra
Yeah, that's
preservatives
my
or
only
gunk or
problem with
stuff like that.
Ensure. So on race day, all calories are good calories, but the
Yeah.
problem with Ensure is that there's a lot of junk ingredient in the American version.
Gelatin
I
and
don't know
stuff
what
like
version
that. And
he's
yeah,
using. He
yeah,
might have a
yeah,
cleaner version, but like in the American version, if you look at that, I'm like, I can't believe grandparents are drinking this. Like it's just filled with
yeah.
seed oils and bad stuff. And so the problem with Ensure is like it might work on race day, but a lot of times what you do on race day bleeds into your everyday training.
Totally.
And so I like the Formula 369 because it's a really clean product, and so
Super clean
yeah,
product.
yeah.
Mix the recovery with coconut milk for the fat, and then I've just got the sugar mix. And so I've tested that, and it worked. I drink it the whole time. I don't get sick of it. The recovery mix is like a really pleasant chocolate taste as well, natural like cacao powder chocolate taste. So it's pleasant as well and works great.
Yeah, and you did, so just to verify, you did all liquid
All
for
liquid.
your
Mm-hmm.
Sebring, and you were only off the bike or stopped for about 11 minutes of the
I,
24
I think
hours.
Strava said 11, but I think it was 14 on my Garmin. So yeah, 11 or 14 minutes, somewhere
Yeah,
around
so
there. It's
it's
just,
real small,
yeah.
real small.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So I tell you, let me share the screen. Let's jump in
Cool.
and look at this ride. It was pretty impressive. And so I think that the audience will still be able to see us, but definitely be able to see the screen. Can you see that screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, yeah. So you did so the entire ride, amazing, 233 watts, almost 24 miles an hour. You're rocking out ceramic bearings, you're rocking out a wax chain, disc wheel, deep dish front, full TT bike. Like you were
Yep.
set up, just amazing TT. Oh, one question I had to ask you. Have you ever been to a wind tunnel?
No, that will be something I tackle as I want to go further than this. And I know
Yeah.
with my bike setup, I've done it pretty budget friendly. In fact, I have this a couple sponsors that I'm working with. I also got the frame from someone that was very generous that had it laying around. And so
Right.
it's an old Shiv rim brake. But I had a 2 by system on there. So I had a front derailleur. I didn't have an aero chain ring. Like there's all like the skin suit wasn't
Yeah.
perfect. It had pockets on the legs even because it's just the way that our team set it up for last year. So I've got a long sleeve skin suit coming in. I've got a new bike coming in, a 1 by and chainring. Like I got 20 or 30 watts to save just in
Yeah. So
equipment
there,
coming out.
that's what I love about this. So it's like
Yeah.
when next year, if you go to do this, I'm saying there's what's great to be used. Like I'm seeing a lot of areas of improvement, right?
Yeah.
It becomes problematic when you don't see any areas to improve. But
Right.
that's what I love about you. You're training, you're going to get stronger, you're going to get better tech, all that great. You're going to learn how to game your physiology to pace better, all that stuff. So I really love it. So yeah, so you were almost at 24 miles an hour, 69 cadence, 133 heart rate for that 576 miles. This is your heart rate, and this is your power data for the entire time. You can see these little black strips are where we have absences in data, which means you stop for a moment. But what I love, I wanted to break out. And so when I'm looking at this data for the first time, and I have no comments from you, I'm not in contact with you. When I look at this, right? So I look at the first 5 hours, 264 watts. The last 5 hours, 194 watts, right? So I'm seeing a collapse. So I work with ultra TT, ultra athletes, and and I have them think of it as if they're doing a TT, right? It's a time trial. It's
Yeah.
like, and so I work with athletes in their like 40K time trial or their 8 mile time trial. And, so I take those principles and those philosophies and apply it to the broader thing. And so if I see someone go to do a 40K TT, which is, like 55 minutes, 56 minutes, something like that, right? We want them to start off a little bit easier, but then, a little slower, easier, but then end stronger, harder. And, the concept of negative splits. And so
Yeah.
when I'm looking at this, my first question was, well, he's racing. Is he going for a PR or is he racing?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was at Psycho this last year, and a Canadian won the North American 24-hour non-drafting solo for the North America World
Yeah.
Ultra Cycling. And he was there to race, so he wasn't going for a PR. So it was actually a race
Yeah.
until it wasn't a race anymore. So if I were to look at his watts, I think he got almost 500 miles for the day.
Yeah.
But if
He's
I
like
were to look at his
497 or
power,
something. Yeah.
yeah, if I were to look at his power, it would be really top heavy on
Mm-hmm.
at the front because he's racing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now if you want the PRs, then right, there's a collapse. But the 24-hour, it's hard to experiment. It's hard to understand what's your
Totally.
starting point. What's that heat of the day going to do to you? What's the cold of the night? It got really cold at Psycho. What's that going to do to you? Right. And so there's a lot of fun things to figure out
Yeah.
for these events. And so, yeah, basically, if we look at that first 5 hours, your power trend line is straight across. Like
Yeah.
there is no change. That 5 hours, there was no break, 264 watts, and was amazing. And then we see the trend line, power trend line down, and then the the explosion. I want you to talk about all this, right? So the kind of the explosion, I call it, and then the redemption, right? The revenge, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at this, as a coach, and then, all of this, when I'm working with athletes, this is all conversation. It's never dictates or anything like that. Right. So what I would say, if an athlete turned in this data to me, I would say, this is awesome. Great data. Now let's bring this down to 250 and
Totally.
see if you can what we can do is like, can we hold 250 all the way across?
Yeah.
Right. So it's, just start off a little slower, easier. And then, and so that would be my strategy and then you ended up getting more miles by starting off slower, easy, because you don't collapse so much at the end. Then I actually had one athlete at Psycho. He was a brand new athlete to me. So this was a great experiment. So I had 24-hour data from him where he went out way too hard and just collapsed and died 1,000 deaths to get across the line. But then he came to me. He didn't build his aerobic. He was on with me for a month. But I said, okay, here's how you're going to get more miles through negative splits. And so we had him start like lower zone, or like upper zone 1, and then in the middle of the night move to lower zone 2, and at the end of the race actually end upper zone 2. Right.
Yeah.
So his power trend line went up, and he got, without any gain in fitness, he got more miles because he didn't collapse at the end. And then when you start that collapse at the end, you find yourself off the bike more,
Yeah.
those kinds of
Totally.
things. And so it's all about, slow miles are better than no miles and staying on the bike. So that's my little speech when I was just looking at your data. So tell me where I'm wrong, where, whatever, go through and talk to us about this data.
Yeah. So many things to break down. Like I said, the sickness beforehand really played into it, and not being familiar with how I was going to respond to the heat. I did some heat specific training. Last winter, I trained all in my garage, and it got down to like 40 something, like low 50s most of the time when it was out there. So then when spring hit, I found that my power and my perceived effort and everything that I was trying to work with was not matching, because I was running cool out there, but I would be outside and the sun would be on me and I'd be hot. And so the effort was different. And so this year, especially knowing I was going to Florida, I moved the bike inside, and specifically to have a better training temperature for what I'd eventually be racing in. And then I did some days where I cranked up the heat or I turned off the fans for a couple hours. I don't have a core sensor. I'm going to mess with that in the future for sure. But that was one thing, was like, I went in sick, wasn't sure if it was the heat or anything. And so the only thing that I really knew to trust in was the power. I saw the high heart rate. It didn't feel extra hard, but like I said, you can't tell that early in a race. You really have to be in tune with your zones more, I feel like, on something like this or some other sort of effort. So it didn't feel bad. It felt like I was going to settle in, and then it never really settled, and it just got hotter. And so I was like, crap, I'm either going to make it to the night and it's going to cool down and I'm going to be fine, or it's going to be a struggle bus to get through the end of it. So there was no racing there. In fact, by less than an hour in, I had lapped everyone except for one guy who was the eventually guy who came in second place. And I think we looked back at some of the recordings, and he's like right on my tail until like 30, 40, 50 minutes in or something like that. And then he backs off, and I lapped him in an hour and a half. And the second time that I came up on him was 2.5 hours. So he was slowing down even more. And that time I went past him pretty quick. And then all of a sudden he was right beside me. And he's like, "Are you doing the 12-hour or the 24-hour?" And I said, 24-hour. And he said, okay, and faded back, and I took off. So I was just set on a mission. And like I said, if I hadn't been sick, if I was more familiar with what the heat was doing to me in that current
Yeah.
moment, I would have backed down because I know my body, I know what I can
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I also have this in my head of like, I live at 4,500 feet and this is 0 feet. So I should have a little bit more in the tank, but I don't know how that all works with just being sick and with also being hot and everything. So I'm just going to like trust the process, stick to my number and see how it plays out. And it was a gamble that almost broke the system for sure. Like the night was tough to get through. Like it was a game of stay on the bike for several hours. And I don't want to do that. That's not how I plan to pace it, not how I want to do it in the future. But it was a gamble that I'm glad that I took just to learn. And then also like, you never know, like maybe I felt good or maybe it cooled down or something. So yeah, I got to the nighttime and originally I just backed off a little bit and thought, okay, I'm just going to go lower into my zones and just sit here for a while and just ride this out. I'm not going to be able to keep up the pace that I wanted to, but I feel comfortable here. And then probably like 3 or 4 hours of that, right around 15, 16 hours in, it hit me pretty hard that like it was going to be a struggle to just finish. And I was like, crap, how do I get through this? My wife had asked me how I was during one of the stops and like the whole next lap. I told her, great, fine. And I was like kind of grouchy. I was pretty grouchy, actually. We have footage of it. And I was like, I'm fine. I'm doing great. And then she's like, okay, great. That's awesome. But that whole next lap in my head, I was like, I'm not fine. I'm not fine. I'm not fine. Like, it's like all that could play in my head is like, you are not doing okay. This is not going great. And so I sent her a text message after I crawled out of that hole of like, regardless of whether or not you're doing fine, this is what you're doing and this is what you're committed to. So like figure out a way to get through this. And the first way that I thought about doing that was I texted her and said, don't ask me if I'm okay. Tell me I'm doing great. And so from there on out, she was like, you're doing great, cheering for me, being awesome, which she generally was anyway. I was just hypersensitive and like on the edge of like throwing the bike down and being done at that moment anyway. And so that was a great turnaround and it got me back into the saddle for a little while. And so I held on pretty good. You can see in that data that I kind of settled for a little bit. And then there's a pretty precipitous drop off where it's just like things like really hit the fan. Like I was like, I just got to go completely down to survival mode. And it's a game of stay on the bike. Like whatever I can do to just keep pedaling is going to be, yeah, right before that 5 hours, you can see there's a pretty, yeah, right around there. And those hours, the last 6, 7 hours, I had plans to stop as little as possible. Towards the end, I was going to stop maybe every 3 or 4 hours because I knew I needed to space it out. But with 6 hours to go, I was like, there's no way I'm staying on the bike for 3 hours. So I started doing this bargaining ship of like, okay, I can stay on the bike for 2 hours though. And so instead of saying I can't, I started saying, how can I? What can I do? And how can I commit to that? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to stop every 2 hours to the end. I texted them my plan. I told them what bottles I needed every stop and that I was going to stop and everything. And I was like, okay, great. I've got a plan. It's going to work. I'm going to be fine. So I just put my head down and started going. The plan didn't work. I stopped more. I slowed down more, but it gave me like the energy and the foresight to just like keep working towards something and make it happen.
Yeah. Well, the results speak for themselves. Amazing effort. What's next for you on your big tour?
Yeah. So after this event, I had a couple other plans in mind. Hoodoo is the North Ultra Distance Championship, North American Ultra Distance Championship for WUCA last year that I won. And so that was always in my plans to go back there and
Mention that really quick. Mention like you not just only won it, but you took the record by quite a big chunk.
that was my first ultra distance race. And of course, like I was expecting a huge learning curve and I had a huge learning curve. I had huge nutritional problem there. about 4 or 5 hours in, my stomach completely crashed, and I didn't eat like more than 1,000 calories for about 12 to 13 hours. Like almost nothing coming in, like just surviving, wanting to quit in so many different ways. Anyway, it still worked out because the original course record was 35 hours and I did 29 hours. So I took 6 hours off of it. There was one other guy who on a shorter, older course did like a couple minutes literally faster than me, like 2:29 and 4 minutes or 3 minutes or something, and I did 6 minutes. But it was a lot. It was shorter by 20, 30, 40 miles and a lot less climbing as well. So it was a phenomenal outcome for my first endurance ultra race. And it was like, okay, this is where I should be. This is what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, before I forget, and we talk about your next big event,
Yeah.
think about humidity as well. All right. So what was the
Yeah.
humidity in Florida? So that it's never the heat that gets me, but
Sure.
as soon as we get just a little bit of humidity out here, that's actually what kills me. So research that and go through the kind of the physiology of that. It's for me,
Yeah.
everybody's different. Like, we know,
Yeah.
for me, it's actually the humidity, and especially since in a dry place that you live.
Yeah. I'm super
When
dry here. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you showed up to Florida, I mean, your physiology might not know what to do with that at all.
Yeah, which is good for me. You mentioned the 24-hour record. From what I've read of what Strasser's plans were to break the record, he eventually did it in his home country, but his plans were to go to Denver. There's less air resistance at around 4,000 or 5,000 feet. And other factors, including humidity, which then you reduce your rolling resistance and your body changes different and everything. So that is one thing that like Florida was not super suitable for like my training and style and everything. So I definitely want to go for a 24-hour outdoor record, and I'll find a course around here and it will be a lot more suitable. But humidity, that's interesting. I'll have to.
Yeah. What is your zone? So a great way to look at it is sort of, like, so so say like today I went out, I did this, right? I did a FTP effort, right? 300 watts. My heart rate is right there, right? So if I go out for a zone 2 ride at 200 watts, I know my heart rate's going to be at 120. As soon as that humidity goes up, all of a sudden, 200 watts, my heart rate's at 130. Mm-hmm. And so that's just something to consider. And it's not the heat. It could be a cool day, but if it's humid, it's just my body will not stand for humidity. And it gives me 10 points on my heart rate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I love that you're wearing your heart strap. So I looked at your cardiovascular drift for the whole, to see if there was any, major decoupling, from your, your heart rate zones to your power zones, and, how your heart rate went versus your power trend line. And you were at the end of the night, you were at 2%. 2% cardiovascular drift for 24 hours. So I think you could have went harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was amazing. Like, so you're fit, like you're really good. Like, that's amazing. Yeah.
One workout that's a very ultra specific workout that I've learned about was doing 5 hours at 85% or 80% of your FTP. It's an extremely hard effort to do it for that long. I did that like 6-7 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks beforehand, somewhere in there. And my heart rate didn't drift until the last 20 minutes. It was just spot on, like to the beat the whole time.
So do you do anything after that, or you're just doing a 5-hour effort?
I did 5 hour and then spun down on that particular day.
So tempo zone 3 is typically divided like what you can do for 3 hours to 5 hours. Right. And so it would be like your upper zone 3 for 3 hours, but your lower zone 3, like for 5 hours. And that's kind of how we define that term. Very carb heavy, very intense burning, but that's actually my favorite workout to do every spring, just to kind of see where I'm.
It hurts though, right?
Like, right. It's like, you 60 miles, right? 65 miles for where I live. It's up and down. And you start off at tempo, and it's vigorous, it's hard, but then the end at tempo It's
Yeah.
really super hard. But again,
Yeah.
it's a great workout. Like I love that you like that type of workout because
Oh
I,
yeah.
I recommend it. And like especially my juniors, they'll be like, why would I want to do 5 hours at tempo, or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's great to learn how to pace. You
Yeah.
have to fuel that because you're
Totally.
just burning your muscle
Oh
glycogen through
yeah.
that whole effort. So
Yeah.
I love that you
I
did
think
that.
that I think that that was like a 1200 calorie per hour burn rate at that effort for me. And so it was just, yeah, I was eating 800 calories and going 550 in the tank every or whatever in the tank
Yeah.
every hour.
So
So
I love the tempo work. I do a lot of tempo intervals because it really builds out. If you think of your muscles like sponges,
yeah.
soaking up that glycogen and then putting it back and soaking it up, putting it back. And we want to build those sponges,
Mhm.
right? We want to teach that metabolism. And so everything that you're doing is metabolic. Like to go for 24 hours, it's a metabolic deal. It's all about energy. It's all about
Yep.
training your body to become more efficient at training your body. And so if we look at your efficiency for this ride, you had an efficiency factor of 1.8. That means you're doing efficiency factor is how many watts you can do per heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
And when your energy is more efficient, you're going more watts per heartbeat. You're able to throw down more watts per heartbeat. I think Joe Friel actually invented that or he read about it and really made a big deal about it, but like his name is really associated with that concept of watts per heartbeat. And so you had after that event 1.8, which is really really super fit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I don't know if you've ever studied that metric, but
I
that
haven't
was,
ever studied that one actually. I've heard of it in passing, but haven't dived into it.
yeah. And so it's something that I train by. So I don't look at every workout when I coach. I look at it over time. And so
Yeah.
if you have someone like, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, I want to see their trend line go up. Right. So at
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of a base season, they might be like at 1.6, but then, at the end of a base foundation build period, they're like at 1.8, 1.9. That's what, we want to see. And so, you were at 1.8, which is, it's really impressive. You're able
Mm-hmm.
to drop bombs. You're really super efficient with your energy usage. And it's all about energy. It's all about
Totally.
taking glycogen from your muscles, putting it back in, and
Mm-hmm.
and just building that glycogen capacity in your
Yeah.
muscles in your thighs. And so yeah, you've got a
It's
lot of that just dialed in. I'm really impressed. Now, what's your next big event for this year?
So I have two big things coming up. One is a virtual event and one is a race event. So I do a ton of Zwifting. I have a huge community of friends and people I've met on there and cycle with. And in so doing, when I did the 24-hour test in December, I realized because I did it with this guy where 2 years in a row now, we've rode every road on Zwift in one ride. So you go all around Watopia and all the different maps and you hit every single road. Last year, it was significantly less because they've added a lot this last year to the maps, including we did the climb portals and everything. So I think that took us about 16 or 17 or 18 hours, but it was like 30,000 feet of climbing in there because we went
Yeah.
up all of the climbs. So I did the last 6 hours with Constance in the desert on Tempest because that's where the pacer happened to be. And I recognized that if I had done that effort just with Constance, like in the desert and going fast, I would have put up the longest Zwift ride out there. And I was like, well, I should do that. That would be cool. And so I started messaging a guy at Zwift headquarters, Peter Bradbury. He's a good friend of mine now. And we've been talking for a long time, but about this, we've been talking about it for months. And I eventually got some people on board to put it all together. So Wahoo's sending me out trainers for it. I'm having it actually at Envy because I live 10 minutes from Envy headquarters. And
Okay.
so Envy is hosting me, Zwift is putting it on, Wahoo's doing it, and I'm doing 24 hours. And I'm going for the Guinness World Record, the Zwift longest known ride, which are different. I'll break down in a second. And also, I'm setting the standard for the WUCA World Record virtually because they do
Okay.
it differently as well. So
Right.
the Guinness World Record is 591 miles. Remember, this is draft on like you could be in a group on
Right.
completely flat on virtual. The longest they could find that they thought was legitimate on Zwift, because Peter and he had a team actually look at the data,
Right.
was like
Right.
639 miles. If I stay with Constance and we have a good group, I will get at least 650, and I could get up to 660 miles. So that's the goal for that ride. But WUCA does it differently, and this is where it gets interesting, because I wanted to work with WUCA on this because they're the big,
Mm-hmm,
well, they're pretty
mm-hmm.
small actually, but they are the legitimate source of ultra cycling in our
Right.
world.
Right.
And they have these standards set for virtual records, but no one's done them because of this. You have to do an in-life test with them where you go out on your bike and you have to do at least 10 miles. And essentially, they're going to calculate your CDA with their own method, knowing the conditions of the day and how fast you went and everything and your weight and everything. They're gonna essentially pull a CDA number out of that. Then when you do the record indoors, all they want is your average number and your weight, but they're also, so then they can calculate your speed, but it's based on the position that you were in. So if you did that 10 miles completely tucked in the arrow position, there's going to be an official there that's going to keep track of every time that I sit up or touch the bars or get out of position, and it's going to penalize my speed for that time period. So they're going to see how long I was arrow and how long I was sitting up. So it's definitely more of like a legitimate inside, because on Zwift, my pacer, my avatars on there is completely arrow the whole time, right? Like they
Right.
don't give up
Right.
at all.
Right. Right.
So I've been training like that indoors to do this 24-hour. I'm in the TT bars the whole time. I can do threshold in it now. I can do VO2 in it now. Like I've gotten very comfortable and powerful in that position. So I'm expecting and hoping to put up a really big number there to get that record kind of in the books and kicked off, and hopefully have someone go chase it someday.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, like, so much there that you just said, but what I love and I hope people take away is that, you're practicing, you're training in that TT position. It is
On
difficult.
my
So,
kicker bike, I have arrow
yeah.
bars on my kicker bike.
Yeah, a great example. So last December, I went to a wind tunnel in Charlotte with an athlete. Now he's only doing 40K TTs,
Right.
but we contorted him. There's the bike fitter position, and then
Yeah.
there's the wind tunnel position, and that wind tunnel position can get real uncomfortable really quick. But if you put 500 miles into that position, then it's going to get a lot more comfortable. Your body's going to
Totally.
get a lot more used to it. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that you said is that, you're spending a lot of time dedicated to that TT position, which is,
All my training time, 30
yeah,
hour weeks in that. And I'll tell you what, doing middle zone 2 when I first started doing it, no, not fun. Like did not happen well.
yeah.
Thinking of doing upper efforts, not even close to it. But week after week after week, it just got easier and easier. And now I said, like, that's just a comfortable position now. And they can do
And yeah,
all
and
of
it
the
works.
things.
So we saw video. You posted some great videos on your Instagram. Please, everybody, follow Matthew on his Instagram. But you looked so good. Just cruising at 70 cadence. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
just looked so good. Like you got it all. You got it all worked out. All right.
Got to
So
dial it
we
in.
have a virtual world record that you want to get. Now, are you doing anything else?
Yeah, so I just actually registered today because the cutoff is tomorrow for Race Across the West.
Yeah,
And
great.
I am pumped about that. I originally wanted to do it this year, but thought I just can't get all of the funds and people and stuff together. And then after doing this and getting in the limelight a little bit and getting more people interested, I now have some more support. And I want to go for the WUCA World Cup and I want to go for course records. Like I actually just got interviewed by a local newspaper today. Hopefully, they're going to do an article on what I accomplished and everything. And uh, I'll say the same thing that I said there partway into the conversation, where it's like, it sounds weird, but I'm not a very competitive person. I have always been about like getting the most out of myself, or like loving the burn, or like trying to become the best me that I can in the things that I'm passionate about. Not everything, and I'm not a perfect person, but the things that I want to get into, I am a student and I learn them and I study them. And so I think that I look competitive going for like, I'm going to go for the, race across the West course record. That sounds very competitive, but it's more about like, I know where I'm at fitness wise, and I look at what the record is, and I think, okay, I'm going to get that if I perform according to my current ability. And so, everyone wants to hear about people going for records. So that's what you're going to hear me talk about. That's what you're going to hear me advertise. But for those that know me and hear this and actually get to know everything, I am just like pushing myself as far as I possibly can and showing you can't only eat, you don't only have to eat what people say you eat. You don't like 150 grams of carbs. I ate 165 grams for all of those hours of carbs, plus the other things. There's no limit to like zone two. I don't know, there's no limit, but let go of the limit of what people say is beneficial zone two training. That's like all I've done to get to where I'm at. And I'm going to have to do more to get stronger. I understand that. And I'm going to work on that. But like, let go of the limits that everyone puts on you and bust through those and see where it takes you.
Yeah, well said. I'll be at Race Across the East. I have
Oh,
two
cool.
athletes. I'll be the crew of one,
Great.
and then I have another athlete. He's from Switzerland, and he'll be on his out. So I'll be with two
Great.
athletes, but we'll be following you,
Mm-hmm.
live tracking you, and see how you're doing on that. All right,
Yeah.
Matthew. Well, let's end there, man. It has
Okay.
been a pleasure to see your work and your dedication and your effort and learning about your own path to get to where you are. So great job, and really look forward to seeing you out there again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me talk about it. It was fun and I enjoy it.